In a small wooden cabin by Lake Champlain, Vermont, William Sterling, one of New York's most powerful real estate moguls, found himself on his knees before a man in a simple flannel shirt. "Please," William whispered, his voice breaking with desperation, "help my daughter. I've tried everything." The man studied the 25-year-old woman sitting silently nearby, her sightless eyes staring into nothingness. He leaned down and whispered something into her ear, words no one else could hear. For the first time in 3 years, Sophia nodded. William Sterling had built an empire that touched the Manhattan skyline with gleaming towers bearing his name. At 60, he commanded boardrooms where billion-dollar deals were sealed with handshakes, where his word could reshape entire neighborhoods. The Sterling Group had risen from his father's modest construction company into a real estate dynasty that controlled some of the most valuable properties in America. Yet for all his power, for all the influence that made politicians return his calls and celebrities seek his favor, William Sterling felt utterly powerless. His corner office on the 50th floor of Sterling Tower offered a commanding view of Central Park, where autumn leaves painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. The mahogany desk that had once belonged to his father held photographs of better times. William with his late wife Margaret at charity galas, family vacations in the Hamptons, Sophia's Harvard graduation where she had delivered the valedictorian speech with such brilliance that even the hardened business leaders in attendance had wept. Margaret had died 5 years ago, her battle with cancer fought with the same grace she had brought to everything else in her life. She had made William promise to take care of their daughter, to ensure Sophia found her own path to happiness. It was a promise he was failing to keep. Sophia had been everything a father could hope for: brilliant, compassionate, driven. She had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School, speaking fluent French and Mandarin, with plans to expand Sterling Group's international holdings. She had been dating a promising young lawyer, had friends who adored her, had the world at her fingertips. Then came that terrible night 3 years ago, when Sophia had been driving to Mount Sinai Hospital to visit a friend who had been in an accident. The collision happened on the FDR Drive during a sudden rainstorm, a drunk driver running a red light, a moment that changed everything. The surgeries had failed. The specialists had done their best, but the damage to Sophia's optic nerves was irreversible. She would never see again. But the blindness was only the beginning. In the months that followed, Sophia retreated into herself, refusing to leave her room, barely eating, speaking only when absolutely necessary. The confident young woman who had once commanded respect in corporate negotiations became a shadow, afraid of the world she could no longer see. William had hired the best therapists money could buy, taken her to clinics in Switzerland and Japan, consulted with experts from Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic. Nothing helped. Sophia remained trapped in her own darkness, and William watched helplessly as his daughter slowly disappeared. Now, 3 years later, William spent his nights staring out at the city lights, wondering where he had gone wrong. He had given Sophia everything: the best education, opportunities most people could only dream of, the security of unlimited wealth. But none of it mattered now. His daughter was slipping away, and all his power, all his money, all his connections couldn't bring her back. That was when he heard about Dr. Nathan Hayes. 300 miles north, in a cabin that seemed worlds away from Sterling Tower's gleaming heights, Dr. Nathan Hayes was teaching his 8-year-old son Jake how to properly sand a piece of oak. The wood would become a new bookshelf for Jake's growing collection of nature guides and adventure stories. Nathan's hands, once steady enough to perform the most delicate eye surgeries, now found peace in simple carpentry. There was something honest about working with wood. If you made a mistake, you could sand it down and start over. If only life were so forgiving. Nathan had once been the most sought-after ophthalmologist in New York City. At 35, he was still young, but his reputation was that of a master surgeon. He had graduated from Harvard Medical School at 24, completed his residency at Johns Hopkins, and quickly established himself as someone who could save vision when others had given up hope. His Manhattan practice had a waiting list months long, and his research on retinal regeneration had been published in the world's most prestigious medical journals. He had been married to Dr. Rebecca Hayes, a brilliant pediatrician who shared his passion for healing. Together, they had been medicine's golden couple, saving lives and building a beautiful life together. Jake had been the center of their world, a bright, curious boy who asked endless questions about everything from why leaves changed color to how birds knew where to fly in winter. Nathan would spend hours with him, explaining the mysteries of the natural world, teaching him to observe and think and wonder. Rebecca would join them for their weekend hikes in the Adirondacks, where Jake would collect interesting rocks and Rebecca would identify wildflowers. They had been planning to have another child, had already picked out names, and started converting Nathan's home office into a nursery. Then came the night that shattered everything. Nathan had been in the middle of a complex surgery to save the sight of a construction worker who had been injured in an accident. It was delicate work, requiring absolute concentration and steady hands. That was when the call came. Rebecca had been in a car accident while rushing to the hospital to treat a child who had been severely injured in a house fire. She had been hit by a drunk driver just blocks from their apartment. Nathan faced an impossible choice: leave his patient on the operating table to rush to Rebecca's side, or finish the surgery and pray that other doctors could save his wife. He chose to complete the surgery. When he finally reached Rebecca's bedside 20 minutes later, she had been gone for 15 minutes. The construction worker would keep his sight, but Nathan had lost the love of his life. The guilt consumed him like a cancer, eating away at his confidence, his purpose, his ability to hold a scalpel without his hands shaking. He had saved a stranger's vision while failing to save the woman he loved most. How could he trust himself with another patient's sight when he couldn't protect what mattered most? The medical board had been understanding when Nathan requested a leave of absence. His colleagues assured him it was temporary, that grief was a process, that he would heal and return stronger than before. But Nathan knew better. He had broken something inside himself that night, something that couldn't be repaired with time or therapy or good intentions. He had failed the most important test of his life, and he couldn't risk failing again. So he took Jake and left the city behind, trading his Manhattan practice for a simple life in Vermont, where the only lives he was responsible for were his own and his son's. The autumn afternoon was crisp and clear when William Sterling's black BMW wound its way up the mountain road toward Nathan's cabin. Nathan heard the expensive engine long before he saw the car. It was a sound that didn't belong in their quiet world of birdsong and rustling leaves. He was teaching Jake how to measure twice and cut once, an old carpenter's wisdom that had served them well in their new life. When the sleek sedan pulled into their gravel driveway, Nathan felt his stomach tighten. Cars like that meant only one thing: someone wanted the doctor he used to be. William Sterling emerged from the driver's seat wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. He moved with the confident stride of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, but Nathan could see something desperate in his eyes. Behind him, moving slowly with a white cane, came a young woman whose beauty couldn't be dimmed by the lost expression in her sightless eyes. Nathan's medical training kicked in automatically, noting the way she held herself, the careful precision of her movements, the invisible weight she seemed to carry. "Dr. Hayes," William said, his voice carrying the authority of boardrooms and power lunches. "I know you're not practicing anymore, but I need your help. This is my daughter, Sophia. She's been blind for 3 years, and I'm running out of options." Nathan wanted to close the door, to retreat to the safety of his simple life. He had stopped being Dr. Hayes the day Rebecca died. But something about the young woman's stillness, the way she stood so carefully apart from the world, reminded him of patients he had once helped. Jake peered curiously from behind the half-built bookshelf, his eyes wide with interest at these unexpected visitors. "I don't practice medicine anymore," Nathan said quietly. "I'm sorry, but you've made the trip for nothing." That was when Jake's natural curiosity got the better of him. The 8-year-old approached Sophia with the fearless interest of childhood. "Why can't you see me?" he asked with innocent directness. Sophia startled at the sound of his voice, instinctively taking a step backward. Nathan saw her hands tremble slightly, recognized the signs of someone who had learned to fear the unexpected. But instead of the panic he expected, something else flickered across her face, a moment of recognition, as if Jake's voice had stirred some buried memory. Nathan found himself moving closer, his medical instincts overriding his determination to stay uninvolved. He knelt down so he was at Sophia's eye level, studying her face with the careful attention he had once reserved for his most challenging cases. There was intelligence there, strength, but also a deep exhaustion that spoke of battles fought and lost. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered, the words coming from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. For the first time in 3 years, Sophia turned her head toward the sound of a stranger's voice. For the first time since the accident, she nodded. The days that followed established a rhythm unlike anything Nathan had experienced since Rebecca's death. William had returned to New York reluctantly, trusting his most precious possession to a man he barely knew. Sophia moved through the cabin like a ghost at first, accepting the small room Nathan had prepared for her but remaining carefully distant from the life humming around her. She ate little, spoke less, and spent most of her time sitting by the window listening to sounds from the lake. Nathan didn't push. His years of medical practice had taught him that healing couldn't be rushed, that sometimes the most powerful medicine was simply being present. Instead, he continued his daily routines with Jake, describing their activities in gentle detail, not for Sophia's benefit specifically, but because it felt natural to fill the silence with words. When he made breakfast, he talked about the way the bacon sizzled in the pan and how the morning light filtered through the kitchen windows. When he and Jake worked on their carpentry projects, he explained the grain of the wood and the purpose of each tool. Jake, with the adaptability of childhood, simply accepted Sophia as part of their household. He shared his nature collection with her, pressing smooth stones and interesting leaves into her hands so she could experience their textures. He read his adventure books aloud in the evenings, his young voice bringing pirates and explorers to life in their cozy living room. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Sophia began to respond. She started eating more of Nathan's simple meals. She asked Jake to repeat a particularly exciting passage from his book. She even smiled when Jake described the antics of the squirrels who raided their bird feeder each morning. The breakthrough came on a quiet afternoon when Nathan was teaching Jake about the different types of clouds visible through their bedroom window. Sophia had been sitting nearby, ostensibly just enjoying the warmth of the autumn sun, but Nathan noticed how still she became when he spoke about the way cumulus clouds looked like cotton balls stretched across the blue sky. "I used to paint clouds," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time she had volunteered information about her life before the accident. "What did they look like in your paintings?" Nathan asked gently. "Different every time," Sophia replied, and for a moment, her voice carried an echo of the passion she had once felt. Sometimes they were fierce and dramatic, all dark grays and purples. Sometimes they were soft and peaceful, like the thoughts you have just before falling asleep. That evening, Sophia asked if she could sit with them while Nathan read Jake his bedtime story. The next morning, she helped prepare breakfast, using her hands to carefully slice fruit while Nathan guided her movements with quiet instructions. When Jake scraped his knee during an enthusiastic game of hide-and-seek, Sophia was the one who cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency, her movements confident and sure in a way that surprised them all. "Where did you learn to do that?" Nathan asked, watching her apply the bandage with professional skill. "I spent a lot of time in hospitals after my accident," Sophia said simply. "You pick things up." It was then that Nathan began to understand that Sophia's retreat from the world wasn't just about her blindness. It was about feeling useless, powerless, unable to contribute. In his cabin, away from the well-meaning helpers and expensive specialists, she was discovering that she still had value, that her hands and heart and mind could still make a difference. 3 weeks into Sophia's stay, the tranquil rhythm of their days was shattered by an accident that would change everything. Jake had been playing with a piece of scrap wood from their latest project, pretending it was a sword in an elaborate pirate adventure. The wood splintered unexpectedly, sending a sharp fragment directly into his left eye. His screams of pain and terror filled the cabin as blood began to flow down his cheek. Nathan's reaction was immediate and devastating. The sight of his son's injury, the blood, the desperate need for surgical intervention, it all crashed over him like a tidal wave of memory. He saw Rebecca lying broken in the hospital bed, saw the construction worker's damaged retina under his surgical microscope, felt the weight of every life he had held in his trembling hands. His medical training screamed at him to act, to examine the wound, to assess the damage, but his body betrayed him. His hands shook uncontrollably, his vision blurred with panic, and his legs nearly gave out beneath him. "I can't," he whispered, backing away from his injured son. "I can't do this anymore." It was Sophia who stepped forward. Moving with surprising confidence, she knelt beside the sobbing Jake and gently took his face in her hands. Her fingers, trained by months of navigating the world without sight, carefully explored the area around his eye while her voice remained calm and reassuring. "Jake, honey, I need you to hold very still for me," she said, her tone carrying an authority that cut through his panic. "Can you open your eye? Just a little bit?" With steady hands that seemed to know exactly what they were doing, Sophia guided Nathan through each step of the examination. She had Nathan bring her clean water and soft cloths, had him shine a flashlight while she carefully cleaned away the blood. Her questions were precise and medical. Could Jake see light and shadow? Could he track her fingers' movement? Was there any pain when she gently pressed around the orbital bone? The splinter missed his eye completely, she announced with obvious relief. It's just a superficial cut on his eyelid. It looks worse than it is, because head wounds bleed so much. Nathan stared at this woman who had spent 3 years hiding from the world, who had convinced herself she was broken and useless, as she calmly bandaged his son's wound with expert care. Her movements were confident, her medical knowledge obvious, her bedside manner gentle but professional. "How do you know all this?" he asked when Jake had been settled with a story and an ice pack. "I was pre-med before I switched to business," Sophia replied quietly. "I always wondered what would have happened if I had stayed with medicine instead of following my father into real estate." That night, as Jake slept peacefully with nothing more serious than a bandaged eyelid and a story to tell his friends, Nathan found himself really seeing Sophia for the first time. She wasn't the broken victim he had assumed her to be. She was a woman who had lost her way, yes, but who still carried within her the strength and knowledge and compassion that had once driven her toward healing. She had saved his son when Nathan's own hands had failed him, had stepped into the crisis with exactly the skills that were needed. "Thank you," he said simply, but the words carried the weight of everything he couldn't express. Sophia smiled, and for the first time since the accident, it reached her eyes. "Thank you for letting me help." The transformation in Sophia over the following days was remarkable. She moved through the cabin with new purpose, helping with meals, reading to Jake, even assisting Nathan with his carpentry projects by holding pieces steady while he worked. She began asking questions about Nathan's medical background, sharing stories about her own abandoned dreams of becoming a doctor. They discovered a shared passion for the science of healing, for the delicate artistry required to repair what had been broken. Most importantly, Sophia began to talk about the future instead of dwelling in the past. She spoke about adaptive technologies that could help the visually impaired, about medical school programs that accommodated students with disabilities, about the possibility of using her experience to help other people navigate their own losses. Nathan watched this renaissance with growing amazement, realizing that in helping Sophia find her strength, he was beginning to rediscover his own. Jake, oblivious to the deeper currents of healing flowing around him, simply enjoyed having what felt like a complete family for the first time since his mother's death. He had never known Rebecca, but Sophia filled a space in their lives that Nathan hadn't even realized was empty. She listened to his stories with genuine interest, helped him with his reading, and brought a gentleness to their daily routines that had been missing since they had fled to Vermont. But as Sophia bloomed back to life, Nathan found himself struggling with a growing weight of guilt and fear. He had recognized something familiar about her from their first meeting, something that nagged at the edges of his memory like a half-remembered dream. When William called to check on his daughter's progress and mentioned that her accident had occurred at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, Nathan's blood ran cold. Mount Sinai, the same hospital where Rebecca had died, the same hospital where Nathan had made the choice that had haunted him ever since. When William Sterling returned to the cabin 6 weeks later, expecting to collect his daughter and return to their old life, he found a young woman transformed. Sophia greeted him with confidence, moving through the cabin's spaces with easy familiarity, laughing at Jake's jokes, discussing meal plans with Nathan as if she belonged there. The broken shell of a person he had brought to Vermont had been replaced by someone who seemed to glow with renewed purpose and joy. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," William said, embracing his daughter with tears in his eyes. "You look like yourself again." "I feel like myself," Sophia replied. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I have something to offer the world." But William's joy was tempered by a growing unease as he watched the easy intimacy between Sophia and Nathan, the way they moved around each other with practiced coordination, the obvious affection in their voices when they spoke. This wasn't just successful therapy, this was love, deep and real, and complicated by factors William was only beginning to understand. That evening, after Sophia and Jake had gone to bed, William confronted Nathan about his growing suspicions. "I've been doing some research, Dr. Hayes, about your background, your reasons for leaving medicine. I know about your wife's death, and I know it happened at Mount Sinai Hospital on the same night my daughter had her accident." Nathan's face went white, but he didn't deny the connection. "I was wondering when you would figure it out. Were you involved in Sophia's treatment?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Nathan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years of guilt and deception pressing down on him like a physical force. "I was the surgeon who operated on her eyes," he said quietly. "I was the one who failed to save her sight." The confession hit William like a physical blow. All this time, the man who had brought his daughter back to life was the same man who had destroyed her vision in the first place. The irony was cruel beyond measure, the betrayal devastating in its complexity. "You knew," William said, his voice barely controlled. "You knew who she was when I brought her here." "No," Nathan said urgently. "I swear to you, I didn't recognize her until you mentioned Mount Sinai tonight. By then, I was already in love with her, and she was already healing. How could I tell her the truth and destroy everything she had gained?" "She has a right to know," William said, but his voice lacked conviction. He had seen his daughter's transformation, had witnessed the joy returning to her life. How could he be the one to take that away from her again? "The night of her surgery," Nathan continued, his voice breaking with remembered pain, "I had just lost Rebecca. I couldn't focus, couldn't think clearly. My hands were shaking, my judgment was compromised. I should have handed the case to someone else, but I was too proud, too stubborn, too broken to admit I wasn't capable. Sophia lost her sight because I was selfish enough to operate when I had no business holding a scalpel." The two men sat in the darkness by the lake, both wrestling with impossible choices. William felt torn between his rage at the man who had destroyed his daughter's life and his gratitude to the man who had restored her spirit. Nathan struggled with the knowledge that his greatest failure had somehow led to his greatest chance at redemption. The next morning brought an uncomfortable tension to the cabin, as both men tried to act normally while carrying the weight of their shared secret. Sophia, with the heightened perceptions that came with her blindness, immediately sensed that something had changed. "What's wrong?" she asked Nathan directly. "You're different today. Distant." Nathan couldn't meet her eyes, couldn't find words that wouldn't be lies. William watched his daughter's growing confusion and anxiety, saw the way she reached for Nathan's hand and felt him pull away slightly. The easy intimacy that had characterized their relationship was suddenly strained, and Sophia could feel it even if she couldn't understand it. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain in a way it hadn't been for weeks. "No," Nathan said quickly. "You've done nothing wrong, you're perfect." But the reassurance rang hollow, and Sophia retreated into herself with the practiced skill of someone who had learned to protect against rejection and disappointment. She stopped participating in their conversations, stopped helping with meals, stopped reading to Jake. The progress of weeks began to unravel in a matter of hours. Jake, sensitive to the emotional currents around him, became clingy and worried. "Why is everyone sad?" he asked Nathan privately. "Did I do something bad when I got hurt?" "No, buddy," Nathan assured him. "The grown-ups are just having some complicated feelings. It's not your fault." But Jake's innocent questions only made Nathan's guilt worse. His son had found happiness in their makeshift family, had bloomed under Sophia's attention and care. How could Nathan explain that the woman Jake was beginning to see as a mother figure was someone Nathan had irreparably harmed? How could he reconcile his love for Sophia with the knowledge that he was the architect of her greatest loss? By the third day of this painful dance around the truth, William could bear it no longer. Watching his daughter sink back into isolation while Nathan tortured himself with guilt was destroying any chance for healing on any side. The secret was poisoning everything it touched, turning love into betrayal and hope into despair. "Sophia," he said, finding her sitting alone by the lake where she had taken to spending her days. "We need to talk. There's something you need to know about Nathan, about your accident, about why you're really here." "I know," she said quietly, her voice carrying a resignation that broke his heart. "I've known for days that you're both hiding something from me. I can hear it in your voices, feel it in the way Nathan won't touch me anymore. Just tell me what it is." William sat beside his daughter on the wooden bench Nathan had built beside the water, struggling to find words for an impossible truth. "Nathan was your surgeon at Mount Sinai. He's the doctor who operated on your eyes the night of your accident." Sophia sat in absolute stillness for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what her father had just revealed. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the lapping of the lake against the shore. "He's the one who made me blind." "Yes. And he knew? When you brought me here, he knew who I was? He says he didn't recognize you until I mentioned Mount Sinai. By then, you were already getting better, and he was already falling in love with you." Sophia stood up abruptly, her movements sharp with anger and betrayal. 3 years, she said, her voice rising. 3 years I've lived in darkness, and the man responsible has been pretending to care about me, pretending to love me, letting me fall in love with him. Sophia, wait, William said. But she was already walking back toward the cabin with the determined stride of someone who had made a decision. Nathan was splitting wood behind the cabin when Sophia found him, his axe falling in steady rhythm as he worked out his own internal turmoil through physical labor. He heard her approach and stopped, leaning on the axe handle as he waited for the confrontation he knew was inevitable. "Is it true?" she asked without preamble. "Are you the surgeon who operated on my eyes?" Nathan set down the axe and faced her fully, his hands steady for the first time in days. "Yes." "And you've known this whole time?" "Not the whole time. I didn't recognize you when your father first brought you here. It wasn't until he mentioned Mount Sinai that I realized who you were." Sophia laughed bitterly. "So for weeks, you've been playing house with the woman whose life you destroyed. How does that feel?" "Like the worst kind of torture," Nathan replied honestly. "Every day I watched you get stronger, watched you smile, watched you find joy again, knowing that I was the reason you needed to heal in the first place. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were getting better," Nathan said simply. "Because you were happy. Because I was selfish enough to want to keep loving you, even though I had no right to." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her hands clenched at her sides as she struggled with emotions too complex to untangle. "The night of my surgery," she said finally, "what happened?" "I've never gotten a straight answer from any of the doctors who treated me afterward." Nathan took a deep breath, knowing that this confession might destroy any chance they had at a future together. "My wife had just died in a car accident. I was in the middle of your surgery when I got the call. I had to choose between finishing your operation and going to her bedside. I chose to finish the surgery. And by the time I got to Rebecca, she was already gone. But my hands were shaking during your operation. My concentration was shot. My judgment was compromised by grief. I should have handed your case to another surgeon, but I was too proud and too broken to admit I wasn't capable. Your blindness is the result of my arrogance and my failure." Sophia absorbed this revelation in silence, her face cycling through emotions too rapid to follow. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than angry. "So you chose duty over love, and we both paid the price." "Yes. And you've been punishing yourself for it ever since." "Yes." Sophia walked over to the chopping block where Nathan had been working and sat down heavily, suddenly looking exhausted. "Do you know what the worst part of losing my sight was?" Nathan shook his head, then remembered she couldn't see the gesture. It wasn't the darkness. It wasn't even the loss of independence. It was feeling useless. Feeling like I had nothing to contribute, like I was just a burden that everyone had to pretend to care about out of pity. "You're not a burden," Nathan said fiercely. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. I didn't feel strong until I came here. Until you and Jake needed me, until I could help and contribute and matter again." Sophia paused, choosing her words carefully. "The man who failed to save my sight and the man who saved my soul, they're the same person, aren't they?" "I suppose they are." Sophia stood up and walked toward Nathan, stopping just close enough that she could reach out and touch his face if she chose to. "If you could go back to that night, knowing what you know now, would you make the same choice?" Nathan answered without hesitation. I would choose Rebecca. I would let someone else operate on you, and maybe they would have succeeded where I failed. Even knowing that Rebecca was already beyond saving? Even then. Because that's what love means, choosing the person who matters most, even when it's illogical. Sophia smiled for the first time since learning the truth, and Nathan felt his heart crack open with hope. "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 3 years. Does that mean you can forgive me?" "I think," Sophia said slowly, "that we've both been punishing ourselves for the same tragedy from different sides. Maybe it's time we learned to forgive ourselves instead." That evening, the 3 adults sat by the fire while Jake played with his wooden blocks nearby, building elaborate structures that he knocked down with gleeful destruction. The conversation that had seemed impossible that morning now felt inevitable, necessary, healing. "I want to stay," Sophia announced, her voice firm with decision. "Not because I don't have anywhere else to go, but because this is where I belong, with both of you." "Are you sure?" William asked. "You could come back to New York, finish your MBA, take over parts of the company. You have your whole life ahead of you." "I do have my whole life ahead of me," Sophia agreed. and I want to spend it here, helping Nathan rebuild his practice, learning to be the doctor I always wanted to be, raising Jake as if he were my own son." Nathan felt tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in 3 years, finally breaking free. "I love you," he said simply. "I've loved you since the day you saved Jake when I couldn't. I've loved you through every moment of joy and every moment of guilt. I'll love you for the rest of my life if you'll let me." "I love you too," Sophia replied. "All of you, the brilliant surgeon who saved so many people, the broken man who lost his way, and the gentle soul who helped me find mine." Jake looked up from his blocks with the serious expression he wore when processing important adult conversations. "Does this mean Sophia is going to be my new mom?" "If that's okay with you," Sophia said, kneeling down to his level. "Can I call you Mom? I would be honored." 6 months later, the small Vermont town had a new medical clinic, staffed by Dr. Nathan Hayes and his assistant, Sophia Sterling Hayes. Nathan had retaken his medical boards and slowly rebuilt his confidence through careful, methodical practice. Sophia had enrolled in a special program for medical students with disabilities, pursuing the dream she had abandoned years before. Together, they treated the vision problems of local residents, while Jake attended the small-town school and came home each day bursting with stories about his friends and his classes. William visited regularly, his relationship with his daughter stronger than it had ever been. He had established a foundation in Rebecca's memory that funded medical training for people with disabilities, and he took obvious pride in watching Sophia bloom in her new role as both healer and beloved family member. On a warm spring evening, the little family sat on their dock, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. Jake was fishing with the patient concentration Nathan had taught him, while Sophia and Nathan sat close together, her head resting on his shoulder. "I can't see the colors," Sophia said softly, "but I can feel them, warm and peaceful and full of promise." "What do they feel like?" Jake asked, always interested in his mother's unique way of experiencing the world. "Like the moment just before something wonderful is about to happen," Sophia replied. Nathan squeezed her hand, thinking about the long journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. He had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past or pretending that pain had never existed. It was about finding the courage to build something beautiful from the pieces of what had been broken. "I love you," he whispered into Sophia's hair. "I love you too," she whispered back. "All of us. This whole beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect family we've made together." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jake caught his first fish of the season while his parents cheered and laughed, and for the first time in years, none of them were haunted by the ghosts of what they had lost. They were too busy living in the joy of what they had found.